The wind in the mountains carried a strange mix of silence and whispers that morning. Sundar Pichai had come with his mother, Lakshmi Pichai, to a remote village nestled high above the clouds. The world here felt slower, almost untouched by time. The narrow paths twisted between small wooden homes, smoke rising from their chimneys, and children with wide eyes peeked shyly from behind stone walls. It was a place where strangers were not common, and every new face carried both curiosity and caution. From the first steps into the village, Lakshmi's calm presence seemed to draw people closer. She walked slowly, her steps careful but steady, her face warm with a quiet kindness. Sundar, walking just behind her, carried the weight of many thoughts. He was a man known across the world, but here in the mountains, his name had no meaning. Here he was simply a son, watching over his mother with deep respect. The villagers saw him as a tall outsider with gentle eyes, unsure if he belonged among them. And yet, there was something in the way he followed Lakshmi, like a boy following the light of home, that made them pause before judging. Within minutes, a scene unfolded that would stay with everyone. Near the well at the center of the village, a group of women argued. One of them, her voice trembling, accused another of keeping more water than allowed. In this mountain place, water was life, and its shortage often created storms between neighbors. The air grew tense, words sharper and eyes filled with suspicion. Sundar stopped, ready to step forward, but Lakshmi placed a hand gently on his arm. She walked closer, not with force, but with the calm strength of someone who had lived through storms bigger than this. Her voice was soft yet carried clearly through the crowd. She did not take sides. Instead, she asked the older children nearby to bring small pots of water from their own homes. She spoke about sharing in times of lack, about how kindness was not measured by abundance, but by the willingness to give when little was left. Her words were not grand, but they carried truth, and soon one child stepped forward, placing a clay pot on the ground. Another followed, and another. The women who argued stood silent, their anger slowly melting into shame, and then into reflection. The villagers watched, stunned at how quickly the fire of conflict turned into a quiet peace, simply because of Lakshmi's gentle way. Sundar's heart swelled as he saw his mother in that moment. She had always been like this, even back in their own modest home when life was uncertain and money was tight. She never answered anger with anger, never turned away when others needed help, even if she herself had little. He realized again why respect followed her naturally. It was not demanded. It was earned in silence, in actions, in choices that spoke louder than words. But what neither Sundar nor the villagers knew was that this moment would only be the beginning. Beneath the calm beauty of the mountain village lay secrets hidden for years. Shadows of old disputes, broken trust, and painful memories waited just beneath the surface. Sundar would soon find himself in the middle of struggles that tested not just his patience, but his very sense of who he was as a son and as a human being. And Lakshmi, with her kind heart, would stand at the center of it all, guiding him with a strength so quiet that even storms seemed to bow before it. As they settled into the small home given to them by the village head, Sundar sat by the window, watching mist curl around the hills. He thought of the moment at the well. He wondered if kindness alone was strong enough to heal the deeper wounds he felt in the air of this place. His heart was calm, but his mind restless, because something inside told him that their time here would not be simple. And soon the first test would come, forcing him to choose between silence and voice, between stepping back and standing firm beside his mother. He turned to see Lakshmi preparing a small meal with the few things offered by the villagers. Her hands moved slowly, gracefully, as if every action was a prayer. She smiled when she noticed his eyes on her, a smile that carried more reassurance than any words could. Sundar looked at her and knew this journey in the mountains would be more than just days of peace. It would be a path of trials, of revelations, and of learning once again what respect, humility, and resilience truly meant. The next morning in the village began with a thin layer of mist wrapping itself around the mountains. Sundar woke early, his thoughts still carrying the memory of what he had seen at the well. He stepped outside the small wooden house and felt the cold air pressing against his skin. The sound of distant bells from cattle echoed in the valley, mixing with the voices of villagers already at work. There was a sense of quiet beauty, but underneath it he felt an unspoken tension. It was as if the mountains themselves kept secrets that no one dared to speak out loud. Lakshmi came out soon after, carrying a small bowl of rice she had cooked with care. Her face was peaceful, yet her eyes held a sharp awareness. She had noticed the silence of the villagers the night before, the way they whispered when Sundar passed, the way their gazes lingered a little longer than usual. Lakshmi was no stranger to such looks. She knew that respect sometimes came mixed with doubt and suspicion. She had lived her whole life understanding that kindness was not always welcomed at first, but often tested, sometimes painfully. Before the sun had fully risen, the village head, an older man named Devraj, came to meet them. He had deep lines on his face, the kind that spoke of both wisdom and burden. His voice was steady as he welcomed them again, but his eyes betrayed unease. He told Sundar and Lakshmi that the villagers had lived with many disputes over the years, water, land, and broken promises. He warned them that outsiders often became targets of frustration when old wounds reopened. Sundar listened carefully, his heart unsettled. He had come here only as a son, wishing for peace with his mother in the quiet of the mountains. Yet it seemed fate had chosen a different path for him. As the day passed, Sundar walked with Lakshmi through narrow paths that cut between homes. Children ran close to them, curious but shy, while some elders turned their faces away. Suddenly, a shout broke the stillness. A man stood in the middle of the path, his face stern, his voice sharp. He accused another villager of stealing grain from his store. The accused man denied it, but the anger grew quickly. People gathered, their voices rising, some ready to defend, others ready to condemn. Sundar's instinct was to step forward, but once again, Lakshmi moved before him. She stood between the two men, her presence calm but firm. Her voice carried a simple truth. Anger without proof destroys more than it protects. She asked them to open their hearts before opening their accusations. Slowly, she encouraged the villagers to search together, not as enemies, but as neighbors. The search revealed something unexpected. The grain was not stolen. It had been spoiled by dampness, hidden under the sacks where no one had checked. Shame washed over the accuser as the crowd grew silent. Eyes turned toward Lakshmi, and though no words were spoken, respect deepened in the silence. Sundar watched this with quiet awe, but also with unease. Twice now his mother had turned anger into peace, but he could sense the storms were not over. As they returned home, he asked her softly if she ever grew tired of carrying so much calm into so much conflict. Lakshmi smiled gently, her voice low and tender. She told him that peace is not carried in the hands. It is carried in the heart. If the heart stays steady, then even when the world shakes, one can still stand. That evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, Sundar sat outside the house watching shadows crawl over the valley. He felt both proud and restless. The villagers were beginning to see his mother's strength, but he also saw envy and doubt rising in some eyes. Respect, he knew, could easily turn into resentment. He feared that her kindness, which should have been a light, might also attract darkness from those unwilling to change. When night came, the village grew quiet, but Sundar could not sleep. He heard footsteps outside, soft and cautious. He opened the window slightly and saw two men whispering near the well. He could not hear every word, but the tone carried bitterness. They spoke of outsiders interfering, of a woman turning the village against itself. Sundar's chest tightened. He wanted to confront them, but he held back. His mind raced, wondering if kindness would be enough to protect his mother if resentment turned into something stronger. Inside, Lakshmi was awake too. She sat by the small lamp, her eyes closed as if in silent prayer. She seemed to sense the unrest even without hearing the whispers. When Sundar returned to sit beside her, she touched his hand lightly and said, almost as if reading his thoughts, that storms always rise before the sky clears. Her calm words gave him strength, but they also left him wondering what kind of storm awaited them in this mountain village. The next morning would bring an answer, but Sundar did not know yet that the test would not come from strangers. It would come from someone he least expected, someone whose broken trust would shake not only the village, but his own faith in people. The morning sun broke through the mist, painting the mountains with a golden glow, but Sundar felt no peace in his heart. The whispers he had heard the night before still pressed against his mind. He had grown up watching his mother stand strong against hardship, but here in this village, surrounded by strangers, he feared that her kindness might not be enough to shield her from what was coming. He looked at Lakshmi as she folded a small cloth on the table, her movements calm and graceful, and he wondered how she always carried peace even when shadows gathered around. Before they had finished their meal, a knock came at the wooden door. A young boy stood outside, his eyes nervous, his small hands trembling. He asked Sundar and Lakshmi to come quickly to the open courtyard where the villagers had gathered. Sundar's chest tightened as he followed his mother, unsure of what awaited them. In the courtyard, a crowd had formed. In the middle stood a man named Karan, one of the villagers who had looked restless during the dispute at the well. His voice was sharp, his tone filled with accusation. He claimed that Lakshmi had turned the village against him, that her words had weakened the bonds of tradition, and that outsiders had no right to interfere in matters they could not understand. Sundar felt anger rise within him, but Lakshmi's hand gently touched his arm once more, reminding him to stay calm. Karan raised a cloth bag before the crowd, and when he opened it, inside lay grains of rice mixed with small stones. He declared loudly that someone had been cheating the people, selling them spoiled food. Whispers filled the courtyard, suspicion growing in the air. Then, with a sudden gesture, Karan pointed at Sundar. He accused him of being the one who had brought dishonor, saying the outsider had used tricks to gain trust while secretly planning to profit from their struggles. The words stung Sundar deeply. He had done nothing but stand beside his mother. The crowd's eyes shifted between him and Karan, torn between doubt and belief. Sundar wanted to speak, but Lakshmi stepped forward. Her voice was steady, her eyes unshaken. She told the crowd that truth could not be built on noise, and lies could not survive in the light. She asked for patience, for fairness, for the chance to seek what was real before making judgment. Devraj, the village head, hesitated but agreed. He ordered that every sack of grain in the storehouses be opened before everyone. What followed was hours of tense searching. The people gathered, sack after sack opened, until the truth revealed itself. It was not Sundar. It was Karan's own store where the spoiled rice had been found, hidden beneath layers of good grain. The courtyard fell into silence. Karan's face burned with shame, yet pride kept him from bowing. Instead, his voice grew harsher. He claimed that Sundar and Lakshmi had tricked him, that they had set him up to look guilty. Some villagers shook their heads, refusing to believe his words, but others remained uncertain, fear and doubt pulling them in different directions. Sundar clenched his fists, anger burning inside. But Lakshmi's eyes stayed soft, her voice calm. She told Karan that anger was not his enemy, but his own heart was. She reminded the crowd that blame cannot heal, that only truth and trust can build peace. Her words fell heavy into the silence, and slowly the whispers faded. Respect began to shine in the villagers' eyes once again, but Sundar noticed the bitterness in Karan's face. He knew this man would not forget the humiliation, and he feared that resentment would soon turn into something darker. That night, Sundar sat by the window, unable to rest. He watched the moon rise above the peaks, its pale light touching the roofs of the village. He thought of his mother's strength, of her endless patience, and he wondered if he could ever carry such resilience himself. He felt the weight of being her son, of standing beside her, yet also the fear of failing her if the storm grew worse. Inside, Lakshmi prayed silently, her lips moving softly, her hands folded with devotion. When she finished, she looked at Sundar and told him that every test is not meant to break a person, but to reveal the depth of their strength. She said that respect is not given freely. It is earned in fire, in struggle, in moments when silence must stand against noise. Sundar listened, his heart heavy yet stronger than before. As the night deepened, footsteps echoed again outside their house. This time, Sundar opened the door quietly and stepped out. He saw shadows moving between the houses, more than just two men. There were 5, maybe 6, whispering and carrying sticks. His chest tightened. They were not here to talk. They were here to frighten. He stepped back inside quickly, his eyes filled with worry. He knew the storm his mother had warned of was beginning, and this time, it might not be calmed with words alone. The village slept under a quiet blanket of darkness, but Sundar lay awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling of the small wooden house. Outside, the sound of whispers and footsteps echoed faintly, carrying the tension of hidden anger. He had seen the men with sticks moving in the shadows. He could still feel the weight of their presence. Though they had not yet knocked on the door, Sundar knew they carried intentions far heavier than wood. Lakshmi rested near the small lamp, her face calm, her breathing steady, as if untouched by the storm outside. Sundar looked at her and wondered how she remained unshaken. He wanted to protect her, to step outside and face whatever danger waited, but his heart was conflicted. Would his actions bring more peace or only more fire to the growing resentment? Just before dawn, the sound of a loud thud broke the silence. Someone struck the outer wall of their house. Sundar rushed to the door, his fists tight, but before he could open it, Lakshmi placed her hand gently on his arm. Her voice was quiet, yet filled with strength. She told him not to meet darkness with darkness. She reminded him that fear feeds on reaction, and silence can be stronger than anger. Sundar's chest burned with frustration, but he stepped back, obeying her calm guidance. When the morning came, word spread quickly through the village. Several homes had been marked with strange signs drawn in charcoal on their walls. Some families woke to find stones placed on their doorsteps, a silent warning. Fear rippled through the community. No one spoke openly, but the whispers grew louder and many eyes turned once again toward Sundar and Lakshmi. Outsiders had become the easiest targets of suspicion. Later that day, Devraj, the village head, called for a gathering. Sundar and Lakshmi stood among the crowd as Devraj spoke about unity and peace. But before his words could settle, Karan stepped forward, his voice cutting through like a blade. He claimed the signs were a curse brought by outsiders, a punishment for letting strangers interfere with village matters. He turned his gaze sharply at Sundar, his words twisting fear into accusation. The crowd grew restless. Some villagers nodded, uncertain but swayed by fear. Others shook their heads, unwilling to believe. Sundar's anger rose, his heart pounding. But before he could speak, Lakshmi stepped forward once again. Her voice was calm, yet it carried an unshakable authority. She told the villagers that curses do not come from outsiders. They come from within hearts poisoned by envy and pride. She reminded them of the truth revealed at the grain store, of how lies had almost torn them apart, and how honesty had restored peace. Her words touched many, but Karan's face darkened with rage. He shouted that her kindness was only a mask, that her calm words were tricks meant to control the people. Sundar could no longer hold back. His voice rang out, steady but filled with emotion. He told the villagers that his mother had nothing to gain from their troubles, that she had only given respect and asked for none in return. His words came not as a defense, but as a son's truth, raw and undeniable. The villagers grew silent. They looked at Sundar, then at Lakshmi, and for the first time, many of them saw not outsiders but people standing with them, sharing their burdens. Respect began to spread like a quiet flame, warming hearts that had been frozen in doubt. But in Karan's eyes, the flame only became fuel for hatred. That night, as Sundar and Lakshmi sat by the small lamp, he confessed his fear. He told her he worried that kindness alone would not protect them, that sometimes force might be the only language the angry understand. Lakshmi listened patiently, then spoke words that pierced the silence. She told him that kindness is not weakness. It is the hardest path, because it demands courage to stand unshaken when others raise their fists. She reminded him that respect built through anger fades quickly, but respect earned through patience lasts beyond lifetimes. Sundar listened, his heart heavy yet strengthened. He realized that his mother's strength did not lie in words alone. It lay in the quiet fire of resilience, in the unbreakable belief that peace can rise even from ashes. But he also knew that Karan's hatred would not rest. The men with sticks would return, and the storm was only growing stronger. As the lamp flickered, Sundar stepped to the window. He looked at the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks hidden in mist. He thought of the days to come, of the trials waiting in the shadows, and he silently promised himself one thing, that no matter how fierce the storm became, he would not let his mother stand alone. What he did not know was that the next trial would come not in whispers or signs, but in a single, shocking event that would shake the entire village, forcing everyone to face the truth about fear, respect, and the power of a kind heart. The morning began with an unusual stillness. The air felt heavier than before, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Sundar stepped outside, his eyes searching the narrow paths that cut through the village. For a brief moment, it seemed like peace had returned. Children played with small wooden toys. Elders sat near the well sharing quiet words, and smoke curled gently from chimneys. Yet beneath this fragile calm, Sundar sensed something was about to break. He had barely taken a few steps when a cry tore through the silence. A young girl ran into the courtyard, her face pale with fear. She shouted that fire had broken out in one of the houses on the far edge of the village. The crowd rushed toward the smoke rising in the distance. Sundar ran with them, his heart pounding, Lakshmi following close behind with steady steps. When they reached the house, flames were already climbing its wooden walls. Inside, voices screamed. Without a second thought, Sundar rushed forward, but villagers held him back, shouting that the fire was too strong. The cries grew louder, and his chest tightened with helplessness. Then, without hesitation, Lakshmi stepped forward. Her calm face seemed to cut through the chaos. She asked the crowd to form a line from the well to the burning house to pass buckets of water together. Her voice was not loud, but it carried urgency and faith, and slowly the villagers obeyed. Sundar broke free from their grip and entered the house. The smoke burned his lungs. The heat pressed against his skin, but he would not turn back. He found two children huddled in a corner, their faces covered in ash, their small hands shaking. With trembling strength, he carried them out into the open air. The crowd gasped as he stumbled into the courtyard, the children clinging to him. Lakshmi rushed forward, her hands steady as she comforted them, whispering words of safety. The villagers worked together under her guidance, and after long, desperate moments, the flames finally died down. The house was scarred, its walls blackened, but the family had survived. The mother of the children fell at Lakshmi's feet, her tears flowing as she thanked her again and again. The crowd turned their eyes to Lakshmi and Sundar, their respect now burning brighter than the fire that had just been defeated. But even in this moment of unity, Karan stood at the edge of the crowd, his face twisted with resentment. His voice cut through the air, accusing Sundar of starting the fire himself to win sympathy. The words fell like stones, shocking the crowd into silence. Some looked uncertain, fear creeping back into their eyes. Sundar's body trembled with fury. He stepped forward, his voice filled with raw emotion. He told the villagers that he had risked his life for their children, that his mother had guided them all to save the house. And still they doubted. Lakshmi placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was calm, her voice softer than the flames had been, yet stronger than any accusation. She told the villagers that truth does not need to shout. It shines through actions. She reminded them that the children standing safe in front of them were the only proof needed. Her words pierced through the crowd, and slowly heads began to nod. Mothers clutched their children closer. Fathers lowered their eyes in shame for doubting. Karan's anger grew darker, but the village no longer echoed his voice. Instead, they turned toward Lakshmi with gratitude, their respect now woven deeper than ever. Sundar stood beside her, his chest heavy but proud. For the first time, he felt the strength of standing not just as her son, but as her witness. Someone who could carry her truth when others tried to bury it. That night, as the stars stretched across the mountain sky, Sundar sat beside Lakshmi outside their house. He asked her how she carried so much calm even when the world threw fire at her feet. She smiled gently and told him that kindness is like water. It may seem soft, but it has the power to put out even the fiercest flames. Sundar listened, the words sinking deep into his heart. Yet he knew the storm was not over. Karan's resentment had not died with the fire. It had only grown, waiting for another moment to strike. And soon, the village would face a choice that would test not just their respect for Lakshmi, but the very strength of their unity. The fire had left the village shaken, but in its ashes, respect for Lakshmi and Sundar had grown stronger. Families came to them quietly, offering food, small gifts, and words of gratitude. Sundar felt a warmth in his chest, yet at the same time he remained restless. He knew Karan's anger was still alive, hidden like embers waiting for the right wind to turn into flames again. For 2 days, the village felt calm. Children played more freely. Laughter returned to the well, and neighbors worked side by side to repair the damaged house. Sundar hoped, perhaps foolishly, that peace would finally stay. But on the third evening, as the sun slipped behind the peaks, Devraj, the village head, called for a meeting in the courtyard. Sundar and Lakshmi went together, unaware that the night would change everything. A crowd gathered under the fading light. Devraj spoke first, reminding the villagers of their struggles, scarcity of water, disputes over land, and the fire that had almost taken lives. His words carried a tone of unity, but before he could continue, Karan stepped forward. His face was tight with fury, his eyes sharp with resentment. His voice rose above the gathering as he declared that the true danger was not fire or scarcity, but outsiders who brought division. He pointed at Sundar and Lakshmi, his accusations heavy and poisonous. He claimed they had bewitched the people with soft words, that their kindness was a mask hiding their true intent to weaken the village. He reminded them of the signs on the doors, of the fire, twisting every event into proof that the outsiders had cursed the village. Fear spread through the crowd like a cold wind. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs grew louder. Some villagers looked down, uncertain, while others stared at Sundar with suspicion. Sundar felt his chest tighten. Anger surged through him, but when he stepped forward, Lakshmi's hand caught his arm once again. Her calm eyes held him steady. She whispered that truth must never come with fire, but with patience. He swallowed his fury and stood beside her, his heart pounding. Lakshmi then walked into the center of the courtyard. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. She told the villagers that fear blinds the heart, that suspicion without proof destroys trust, and that curses do not live in outsiders, but in the hatred people plant within themselves. She reminded them of the fire, of the children saved, of the times when their hands joined together, not as enemies but as neighbors. Her words silenced many, but Karan's voice grew louder, desperate. He shouted that if the people continued to follow her, the village would fall into ruin. His words struck like stones, but the people hesitated. Their eyes shifted between his rage and her calm. Sundar could feel the air tighten with the weight of choice. He stepped beside his mother, his voice strong and clear. He told the villagers he was not here as a stranger, but as a son, standing with his mother. He told them he had risked his life not for himself, but for their children, and that he would do it again without hesitation. His words were not rehearsed. They came from the heart, raw and unshaken. The silence that followed stretched like a rope ready to break. Then an old woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. She said she had seen enough, that Lakshmi's kindness was not a mask, but the truest strength she had ever known. Slowly others joined, their voices rising, declaring their respect for her. The tide began to turn, the crowd shifting like water breaking free from a dam. Karan's face twisted with defeat, but his pride refused to bend. He shouted that they were all fools, blinded by lies. Then, in a sudden motion, he raised a stick and moved toward Sundar. The crowd gasped, but before Sundar could react, Lakshmi stepped between them. Her calm eyes met Karan's rage, her body standing firm like a wall of quiet strength. For a moment, time froze. The villagers held their breath, the mountains silent as stone. Karan's hand trembled, the stick raised high, but something in Lakshmi's steady gaze broke through his anger. His arm faltered, the stick slipping from his grasp, falling to the ground. The crowd erupted, not with fear, but with a wave of voices shouting for peace, for respect, for an end to hatred. Karan stepped back, his face pale, his pride shattered. Devraj declared firmly that enough was enough, that the village would not be torn apart by anger any longer. Sundar felt his chest rise with relief, his eyes burning with emotion. He looked at his mother, her figure standing tall, calm as always, her presence stronger than any fire or storm. In that moment, he realized fully what he had always known. Her strength was not in words or force, but in the unshakable belief that kindness could face even the darkest rage and still stand unbroken. Yet, as the night ended and the villagers returned to their homes, Sundar knew this was not the end. Karan's pride had been crushed, but pride rarely dies quietly. The storm had not passed completely. One final test awaited them, one that would decide not only their place in the village, but the very meaning of respect itself. The night after the confrontation was heavy with silence. The stars hung low over the mountains, but Sundar could not find rest. He lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm of his mother's breathing and thinking of Karan's eyes before he dropped the stick. There had been more than anger in them. There had been pain, a hidden wound he had never spoken of. Sundar wondered if even his mother's kindness could reach a man so consumed by pride and resentment. The next morning, the village moved cautiously, as though testing the fragile peace that had fallen after the courtyard meeting. Some families came to Lakshmi and Sundar with food and small words of thanks. Others watched from a distance, unsure but less hostile than before. Sundar walked through the village, noticing how the children no longer hid from him. One even smiled shyly, then ran off, leaving Sundar with a warmth he had not felt in days. But the storm was not over. Near midday, word spread that Karan's wife had collapsed while working in the fields. Sundar and Lakshmi hurried with the others to the small hut where she lay. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale, and fear gripped the family gathered around. The villagers whispered that she would not survive without medicine, but the nearest town with a clinic was far below the mountains. Panic filled the hut. Karan sat by his wife's side, his face broken, his anger gone. His pride had crumbled into helplessness. When he saw Lakshmi step into the room, his eyes filled with shame. He did not speak, but the silence between them was louder than words. Sundar felt his mother's hand tighten slightly around his. She walked forward, kneeling beside Karan's wife, her voice calm and steady. She told the villagers to fetch herbs, to boil water, and to prepare cloth. With her quiet knowledge of simple remedies, she began to ease the woman's breathing. Hours passed, and Sundar watched his mother work tirelessly, her hands moving with patience, her voice offering comfort. Karan's anger melted with every passing moment. His eyes stayed on Lakshmi, and slowly, tears slid down his face. When his wife's breathing grew stronger and color returned to her cheeks, he fell to the floor, his voice breaking as he whispered words of apology. He told the villagers that his resentment had blinded him, that his pride had made him see enemies where there were none. He admitted his shame, his voice trembling as he turned to Lakshmi and Sundar. He said he had wronged them, and he bowed his head low, the weight of years of bitterness finally leaving him. The hut fell silent. Then, one by one, the villagers bowed their heads, too. Not because they feared, but because they felt respect so deep it could not be hidden. Sundar looked at his mother, and in her calm eyes he saw no triumph, only compassion. She reached out, lifting Karan gently by the shoulder, her voice soft as she told him that forgiveness was not weakness. It was the beginning of healing. In that moment, the village changed. Old disputes that had lingered for years suddenly felt smaller. Grudges seemed pointless in the face of what they had just witnessed. They realized that Lakshmi's kind heart had not only saved a life, but had saved them all from being prisoners of their own hatred. As the days passed, the village grew warmer. Disputes were settled with calmer voices, children played more freely, and even Karan worked beside others with humility. Sundar saw how respect spread through every corner, not because it was demanded, but because it was earned by kindness. On their last evening in the village, Sundar and Lakshmi stood at the edge of the mountain path, ready to return home. The villagers gathered around, their eyes filled with gratitude. Devraj, the village head, spoke with deep emotion. He said that they had not just welcomed guests, but had witnessed teachers of patience, resilience, and kindness. He promised that their village would carry these lessons long after Sundar and Lakshmi had left. Sundar looked at the faces around him, at the children holding their mother's hands, at the men and women standing with respect in their eyes, and he felt something he could never forget. He felt the truth of his mother's life. Kindness does not need power, it does not need wealth. It only needs courage to stand steady when the world trembles. As they began their walk down the mountain path, Sundar turned once more to look back. He saw the villagers waving, their silhouettes glowing under the golden light of the setting sun. He turned to his mother, his voice low with emotion. He told her that he finally understood. Her strength had never been in silence or words alone. It had always been in the way she carried her heart, open and steady even when others tried to break it. Lakshmi smiled gently, her eyes shining in the fading light. She told him that the true measure of a person is not in how the world sees them, but in how they choose to see the world. And with that, they walked together down the path, mother and son, carrying with them the unshakable truth that respect, humility, and kindness are the only lights strong enough to guide through any darkness.